Minister Ong.
Mr. Speaker, sir, pursuant to Standing Order number 44, I beg to move that the two ministerial statements made by me and Minister for Manpower on free trade agreements and foreign manpower be considered by Parliament.
Question is that the two ministerial statements made by Minister for Health and Minister for Manpower on free trade agreements and foreign manpower be considered by Parliament. Proceed with the debate. Clarifications, speeches. Mr. Patrick Day.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank both ministers for their statements and wish to provide my comments, clarifications and suggestions on this sensitive and important topic which concerns Singaporean workers, especially our professionals, managers and executives. I co-chair the NTUC SNEF PME task force set up by NTUC last year to look into the concerns of PMEs and to flesh out a set of recommendations later this year in relation to employment and employability of PMEs in Singapore. In the past 6 months, we have surveyed and engaged through more than 15 focus group sessions about 8,000 professionals, managers, and executives to better understand their concerns, fears, and anxiety, and ideate proposals to overcome them. We have heard ground sentiments on a plethora of issues, challenges faced by Singaporean PMEs. On the top of their mind is job security amidst this COVID-19 pandemic. One concern, amongst others, which was surfaced, is the intense competition from the influx of foreign manpower and anecdotes of unfair employment practices by employers who favour hiring foreigners and discriminate against our locals. Some PMEs shared with us their personal experiences of foreign hiring managers bringing in co-workers of the same nationality, while others have shared about disguised discriminatory practices at work, where they felt ostracized when their foreign colleagues who form majority of the team communicate in their native language at work and through the unfair allocation of off days given to their foreign colleagues during public holidays by their supervisors of the same nationality. While it is clear only a minority engages in such unacceptable practices, the concerns are legitimate and we should not ignore it. PMEs I spoke to acknowledged the need for FTAs and foreign manpower in this age of globalization, global competition, and economic survival and success. But we must recognize the need to support our local workforce's aspirations and to address their concerns and anxieties. One Singaporean PME, who is an Asia-Pacific sales director, as well as many other PMEs in those sectors with a higher proportion of foreign PMEs, such as the financial, ICT, and professional services sectors, shared with me that we should not allow the import of non-specialized and non-highly skilled foreign manpower to compete against Singaporeans for well-paying jobs which many Singaporeans can do. I think this principle of complementarity and not direct competition is an important concept which we need to continue to embrace and strengthen. In other words, we need to strike a balance between being open and having a level playing field for our locals with fair opportunities and fair treatment. This balance is not easy to achieve and it's going to be an evolving process. Together with fellow Labour and PAP MPs, I've been speaking and lobbying on this important area in and outside of this House the past decade to ensure fairness, equity, and levelling the playing field, especially for Singaporean PMEs. Since 2011, I've been pushing for a stronger enforcement against employers who discriminate against or unfairly treat Singaporean PMEs, a foreign PME dependency ratio, labour market testing, which subsequently came in the form of the Fair Consideration Framework, the National Jobs Bank, as well as many other policy measures from employment pass qualifying salaries to regular tightening of the FCF and the prosecution of companies who are recalcitrant. We even set up the Employment Claims Tribunal the Tripartite Alliance for Fair Employment Practices, as well as the Tripartite Alliance for Disputes Management, and issued many tripartite advisories, standards, guidelines to strengthen the Singaporean core. I'm heartened that in these past 10 years of lobbying and advocating for a stronger Singaporean core, many of these measures have been put in place, as shared by Minister Tan See Leng earlier, with support of our tripartite partners and other economic agencies such as MAS and EDB to better support and protect our Singaporean workforce and provide them with a fair and level playing field in the job market. In fact, less than a year ago, in the midst of the pandemic and worsening of the economy, the labour movement lobbied and the tripartite partners reacted and updated the Tripartite Advisory on Managing Excess Manpower and Responsible Retrenchment with key principles on fair retrenchment, which provides added safeguards to preserve our Singaporean core in our companies when they carry out retrenchment exercises. That said, more needs to be done to strengthen the Singaporean core, further develop our local workforce's capabilities, and protect our locals from being unfairly discriminated. It is important to recognize the role that foreign manpower plays, which is to complement and enhance the capabilities of the local workforce and not to replace or displace it. In this vein, I would like to put forth some proposals to Minister that aims to address fairness and localization of PME jobs. First, we can enhance fair hiring practices through strengthening enforcement and imposing stiffer penalties for erring companies with discriminatory hiring practices. I previously submitted in this House on revealing or even publishing the triple-week watch list which Ministry of Manpower and TAFEP maintains, so that the potential reputational loss would serve as a deterrence. We should not allow a few black sheep to weaken our entire working structure. I further submit that MOM should consider giving TAFEP even more teeth and bite through expanded powers of investigation, enforcement, and even meting out punishment. Second, we can level the playing field for local PMEs by enhancing the EP application review process to move beyond looking at individual applicants' educational qualification and salaries, and pay close watch to sectors with particular imbalance. Finally, we need to ensure that locals have fair access to PME roles and progression opportunities to improve localization of jobs in high-growth sectors. As I have lobbied before in this House, it's imperative that we ensure concerted, structured, institutionalized, and mandatory skills and knowledge transfer from these foreign PMEs to our local PMEs within a stipulated and agreed time frame, as employers bring in foreign PMEs to fill skills or knowledge gaps in their current workforce. This will help to develop a pipeline of local talent, and at the same time, we will also need to build our leadership bench strength to ensure that Singaporeans can benefit and take up leadership roles in multinational corporations that we bring into Singapore. To sum up, to say that we have found the silver bullet or antidote will not be an easy one, as it's going to be a treadmill journey, a treadmill. We need to constantly watch our step, keep pace, and stay in touch with the pulse. Pay close watch of the economic competition and competitors, keep pace with the changing demographic profile and the future of work, and stay in touch with the pulse and heartbeat of Singaporeans, their stresses, aspirations, interests, and well-being, because every worker matters. Thank you.
Professor Hun Hyen Teck.
Mr. Speaker, sir, an issue that has surfaced in the debate on free trade agreements, FTAs, such as the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, CECA, is that of their impact on jobs. It is important to state at the outset that the number of jobs in an economy is not an immutable datum. Rather, it is variable and it is the result of the net effect of the pace of job creation, which adds to the number of job vacancies, and the pace of job destruction, which reduces the number of job vacancies. In the first few decades after gaining independence, the World Trading System under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, steadily reduced tariff rates and lowered trade barriers. The World Trade Organization, WTO, was established in 1995 as a multilateral institution that facilitated the signing of agreements in areas such as services, investment, and intellectual property. This enabled the Singapore economy to attract multinational corporations, MNCs, to base production in Singapore, thus creating jobs and sell into the world market. With increased protectionist sentiments expressed in many advanced countries in recent years, so that the WTO has had difficulty in reaching new agreements, it has been necessary for Singapore to turn to FTAs to provide a means to enlarge markets for Singapore-based firms. By negotiating and signing FTAs that enable our firms to export to destination markets at lower or zero tariff rates, Singapore can attract foreign capital to work in Singapore, to employ Singapore-based workers and pull up their wages. With Singapore's total fertility rate consistently below the replacement rate of 2.1 since the mid-1970s, the size of the citizen labor force will begin to shrink, with more people retiring than the number of new entrants into the workforce. A shrinking workforce will put downward pressure on GDP growth because productivity growth is unlikely to fully compensate for the labor force shrinkage. Singapore's rise in living standards over the past decades has been facilitated by a steady inflow of foreign direct investment, which brought technology and good jobs. So continuing to attract multinational corporations to base their production here, even as we become more service-oriented, the manufacturing hiring a smaller share of labor force, yet doing this is likely to require a complementary set of skills that can be offered only by a combination of local and foreign workers, given the low fertility rate. At this stage of our development, where indigenous innovation must contribute to productivity growth, FTAs also allow new startups, and both large and local enterprises, LLEs, as well as small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, to face lower trade barriers when selling into particular overseas markets. So we continue to need to rely on MNCs because they are large, they pay better wages, but we're also at a stage where we need to stimulate indigenous innovation. And they'll start small, many will fail, but they need to have the capacity to be able to sell abroad. And therefore, establishing FTAs that allow the partner signatories to the agreement to lower their tariff rates enlarges the market for our new startups and SMEs, as well as LLEs. The increased international competition, to be clear, faced by our local firms also means there will be some job destruction because with increased competition, some of our SMEs may fail. Nevertheless, the creative destruction resulting from FTAs is likely to leave the economy overall with more productive firms that are able to pay better wages. So it's stiffer competition. Some will not survive, and they have to try again. But overall, for the economy, the level of productivity is higher as we seek to generate indigenous innovation as a source of productivity growth. So FTAs are helpful both from the point of view of continuing to attract MNCs to place their production here, but it is also important as a way of giving a lift to our more productive local firms, SMEs to break into potentially neighboring markets and further overseas. The derived demand for workers resulting from the need to meet this external demand for our goods and services by foreign firms and consumers in the partner countries who are signatories of the FTAs will translate into the creation of new job slots with particular tasks. Because what is a job? A job is a combination of tasks that we create. So the allocation of workers with the right skill set to fill these job slots with this particular set of tasks is necessary in order to maximize this Singapore-based firm's profit. Only then is productivity of the firm boosted and the salaries correspondingly increased. As the local workforce raises its human capital, because of the huge investment we have made from the beginning in education, the proportion of the cohort leaving primary school that goes to university has gone up. So I think that from the point of view of increased human capital, as well as the investment in skills future to allow learning on the job, I think there is every reason to have confidence that our local workforce will both have a higher level of human capital as well as have the ability to acquire new skills to function in an age of digital transformation. If we succeed in doing that, then our resident workers will have the comparative advantage to fill these new job slots, the sort of thing that Mr. Patrick Tay talked about. So I think going back to Mr. Ong's analogy, of more job slots but more competition, on the other hand, less competition of future job slots, he talked about being somewhere in between, then I think there's good reason, given our history. The ability to ultimately compete in the world market says there's something positive about tilting toward the direction of increased competition, but we make investment in our local workforce starting from their primary school. And there's every good reason to believe that even as we transit to a phase of the country's development where you're not going to have the 5% growth per year, because that was catch-up growth. We are now at a stage where the potential for growth has to come from innovation driving productivity. I believe that there's every good reason to think that ultimately many of these jobs that our locals take, they graduate from a university, they perhaps start off with in an MNC at a lower managerial position, but with the sort of human capital, with the sort of ability to adjust and compete, there's every good reason to believe that many of them, on their own merits, have the potential to fill in these new job slots, because there's local advantage. Mr. Speaker, sir, to conclude, in the absence of a vibrant international trading system that can conclude new agreements to further liberalize trade in goods and services, I believe that the signing of FTAs overall provides the Singapore economy a means for its firms to expand their market, despite the job churning and the creative destruction. That ultimately, I believe, has positive net impact for our labour market. Thank you.
Mr. Louis Ng.
Thank you, sir. Not a speech, but just a clarification. If I could ask Minister Tan whether moving forward, we will consider legislating the tripartite guidelines on fair employment practice. And I think that's important because it's not just discrimination based on nationality, but also based on race, religion, gender, family responsibility, disability, amongst many others. So I really hope we'll consider legislating those guidelines. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Member Lewis for his suggestion. As I've shared in my speech earlier on, we're looking at refining, we're looking at strengthening not just TAFEP itself, but also the fair consideration framework itself. Give us a bit of time. I think we're reviewing it with the different parties because it's a tripartite nature. in the months forward, I should be able to come back and update this House again. Thank you.
Ms. Hazel Pua.
I thank the two ministers for their ministerial statements, providing a wide range of information and explanation, and for this additional opportunity for us to seek clarifications on an issue that is of great concern to many Singaporeans. An open debate based on the right information can only be beneficial to all parties involved, whether in or out of this House. I'd like to seek a few clarifications. The first one relates to Minister Ong's claim that PSP has made false allegations that CECA is allowing a free flow of Indian PMEs. Can I ask the Minister to provide the specifics of this false allegations that he mentioned, including details like when and where and who. He gave partial quotes, but partial quotes can be taken out of context, and if he can provide the specifics, we can look into it further. Secondly, Minister Ong said that at the beginning of his statement that he would be happy to provide all information that we request for in order to have a more robust debate on the motion subsequently. But at the end of the two ministerial statements, unfortunately, the bulk of the information that we have requested for in our 9 parliamentary questions are not released. So will there be any more data forthcoming in the form of written answers? Thirdly, now we agree that FTAs are important to Singapore's economy, and we're not calling for the abolition of FTAs. Our concern is over specific provisions in FTAs relating to the movement of natural persons. In CECA, just now Minister Ong mentioned that the listing of the 127 professions does not mean that anybody who applies under this will be approved, but it can be rejected even if they apply. Now, Article 9.5, Clause 2 under the heading of professionals states that each party shall grant temporary entry and stay for up to a year. And it goes on to list several conditions. So my question here is, because it says shall grant temporary entry and stay for up to a year, if an applicant meets the criteria that is listed in this clause, namely proof of nationality, letter of contract or similar documentation, educational certificates or similar documentation, as well as the minimum salary requirements for e-pass. For anybody who satisfies these conditions, are we obliged to approve their application? And fourthly, under this clause, the temporary entry and stay is up to 1 year. I would like to seek clarification. Can this entry and stay be further extended or renewed or reapplied? Thank you.
Mr. Ong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me try to answer the honourable members' 4 questions. I hope I got them all correct. Proof of the allegations of PSP, 3rd of August 2019, Dr. Tan Cheng Bok, I think he was SecGen then, of PSP, stated on the Online Citizen Asia Facebook page, I quote, PSP will call for a review of the India-Singapore Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, known as CECA. This agreement, you must understand, was negotiated by our current DPM Heng Swee Keat and signed in 2005. Amongst the terms of the CECA, it allowed the free movement of professionals in 127 sectors to enter and work in Singapore, unquote. 7 July 2020, Dr. Tan, in an interview with Mothership, said, I quote, CECA is an agreement between Singapore and India to allow, I think, 127 categories of professionals to come to Singapore and be given that free hand, actually, practically free hand, to come and work here, unquote. 31st August 2020, Mr. Francis Yuan on the PSP Facebook page and website, he urged the government to release more data on the matter, which is fair enough, but then went on to state that the government, I quote, could not share the next level of details, including the number of Indian nationals converted to PR and those who subsequently gotten citizenships within the 8 years under the intra-corporate transferee provision of the agreement. I think that, unquote. And then that agreement started to suggest that they come in and then become PR and citizens as well. Most recently, 22nd June 2021, in a Facebook post, Mr. Leong Manwai said, the most important economic policies that have affected the jobs and livelihoods of Singaporeans relate to foreign PMEs and free trade agreements, in particular, the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement with India. As members of the public, as members of the House, we will also, or members of public, using our handphones, we will also have received many other unattributable divisive messages coming through our feeds and chat messages. And I think these quotes and all these messages you receive, if you are Singaporeans, especially one facing challenges at the workplace, feeling insecure, you're bound to feel upset and angry. You're bound to feel that I don't want to welcome foreign PMEs. You will grow suspicious of them, even reject them. And it will be a natural reaction because the messages feed on our worries and our fears. We have seen how this has turned out in so many other countries, how the extreme right, nativist, populist parties have grown in strength just by tapping into that fear and insecurity because of globalization is there. But these far-right nationalist parties or nativist parties, they have been growing stronger in many places around the world and created divisions in societies. Sometimes they have replaced the government who take a more moderate policy. And I really hope that it doesn't happen here, because if it happens in Singapore, as it happened elsewhere, our policies, our politics would have gone disastrously wrong. Ms. Hazel Paul said that I promised to give all the data they requested. We tried our best. But as Dr. Tan See Leng explained, no countries release data to that level of granularity. But if I just go back to my speech, what I said is, Dr. Tan will provide more detailed answers to the specific questions, including providing the data which will be useful for our subsequent debate and putting that data in context. I didn't promise that all the data will be tabulated and provided. And Dr. Tan explained why we try to provide as much as we can, but I think there's a limit to what we can do. Ms. Hazel Paul also asked about Article 9. Article 9, as a trade negotiator, you always look out, Chapter 9 of CECA. As a trade negotiator, we always look out for the word shall. And here, when you see shall means you must do something. You don't do, you are in breach of the agreement. So what is the shall here? You shall grant temporary entry and stay up to 1 year for the duration of contract. That's what we agreed to. That means if we approve, if you meet our condition, work past conditions, we shall grant you 1 year of admission. I think it's very reasonable. Imagine you apply for something for the government, and then they tell you, I approve, but don't know how long, tomorrow revoke. Can't be, it's not market friendly at all. So this is what we have agreed to. Remember, the ordering of the clauses matter as well. I was mentioning page 1, I printed a copy, I highlighted it. Second paragraph, third paragraph are what I call the carve-outs. So carve-outs come in the beginning. You read this chapter, you know that this chapter does not apply to immigration measures. Government's policy on immigration, on the granting work pass, granting PR, granting citizenship, does not cover this chapter. And then it goes on to say, what then the government, what then the parties must do. So you shall grant 1 year of approval, should you approve. That's how you read the agreement. I hope I have answered all Ms. Hazel Paul's question. But I do have some question too for PSP, if I may ask. I left my papers there, I'm going to pick it up. I tried to correct the falsehoods of CECA, but the whole purpose of this statement is that I know PSP is preparing for a motion debate, but I'm also hoping that we all go into the debate with some common ground. Yeah. And I think, first of all, common ground must be, let's put aside the falsehoods. And therefore, I clarified which are the falsehoods, and let's put them aside and don't bring them into the motion. What are the first falsehoods? First, CECA does not allow a free flow of intra-corporate transferees to Singapore. And most companies prefer to apply for EPs than to use the intra-corporate transferee route, which actually is more cumbersome. And hence, I mentioned, as of 2020, there were only 500 intra-corporate transferees from from India in Singapore. Second falsehood, CECA also does not give Indian nationals from 127 professions a free hand to come to Singapore to live and work. CECA allows them to apply for EPs. It does not oblige Singapore to approve the applications. Approval is subject to them meeting our criteria. Immigration measures are carved out from the agreement, like all FTAs. But in the spirit of seeking common ground, we come to this house, the floor, and we recognize that globalization is a difficult thing. There are lots of pros, there's also cons. In the case of Singapore, globalization has allowed us to grow, to create a lot of good jobs, and benefited many Singaporeans. If we have not done that, today we will be having a very different kind of debate of massive unemployment, of stagnating wages, graduates not being able to find jobs. But we also recognize there are downsides, and there are two social downsides other than the increased competition. First, while foreign EP holders have come in to help us sustain our growth, and though the growth in local PMEs outnumbered that of foreign EP holders, the presence of foreign EPs have nevertheless created more competition, discomfort, and social issues, and we must manage this. And second, Singaporeans want to know that they will be given fair treatment at the workplace. It is entirely justified, and we have rules to achieve such fairness. And we will continually review these rules and framework, how they are implemented, to ensure that fairness is assured. So this is what the government part have done in the spirit of trying to achieve some common ground as we go into the debate. So may I ask the PSP, our two honorable NCMPs from the PSP, after hearing all the explanation from Dr. Tan and I, will you agree to the following? First, the FTAs, including CECA, are fundamental to Singapore's economic survival and our ability to earn a living, and we should not shake this bedrock for political purposes. Second, CECA does not allow a free flow of Indian PMEs into Singapore, and this is a gross misunderstanding of the agreement and FTAs in general. Nor is CECA the cause of the challenges faced by our PMEs, and we must put a stop to the spreading of the falsehoods. And if you agree to this, then I think we have a good chance to have some common ground that we come into the House again for a debate on the motion, we can have a meaningful and constructive debate. If I may seek the clarifications of our two members from PSP, please.
See Leng, why?
Thank you, Speaker. And thank you, Minister Ong Ye Kung, for the clarifications on our position. And also thanks Minister Ong Ye Kung and Minister See Leng for a detailed explanation of the situation on foreign PMETs, foreign manpower, and the free trade agreements and CECA. As to Minister Ong Ye Kung's questions, I will leave it to the last, or we will leave it to be answered, in the debate that we are going to conduct later on. But there are a few things I like to bring out here, or a few questions I like to ask to clarify the situation further. One, we are not against FTAs. We know the importance of FTA for Singapore as an open economy and especially as a small city-state. However, what we are concerned is what price we are paying. So the first question I want to ask is that in the process of negotiating an FTA, what is our position? What are the bargaining positions that we can give? Because I read things like, because we don't have many bargaining chips, so we have to be, the implication is that we may have to be a bit more relaxed with the movement of people. So one question I want to ask is that, are the movement of people or natural persons used as one of the bargaining chips when we are negotiating the FTA? Excuse me, I need some water. The whole purpose of the PSP and Hazel and I to bring up the issue about foreign manpower or foreign PMETs or foreign talent, whatever term we used, and the FTAs. It is about people's, Singaporeans' jobs and livelihood. So when PSP, Dr. Tan Cheng Bock, raised the issue at the August 2019 launch of the PSP party, it is due to the huge amount of feedback that we got from the ground. By raising the issue, we had hoped it would get some response from the government to explain more about what are FTAs, in particular CECA. Okay. Indeed, you would admit that no other FTA has given and stated specifically that 127 professions can come into work. You may say that, oh, no one has come in through the CECA route, but the clause is there. It is up to the other party whether they want to use it or not. And most importantly, up to our government to administer our employment policies. Because our employment policies are already quite relaxed in granting work passes to foreigners. So the nationals, the Indian nationals, don't have to come into Singapore through the CECA route. So the first question I want to ask is that whether the movement of people is used as a bargaining chip. The second question I want to ask is, we should not focus just on the number of people that got into our job market through the FTA or CECA. They have provided some conditions. Most importantly is how those conditions under the FTAs interplay with our domestic employment policies. So the number to focus on is how many of the respective FTAs nationals, in the case of CECA as Indian nationals, have come into Singapore and take up our PMET jobs. And what is the share of that as a percentage of our total or the foreign PMETs and then our total PMET jobs? That is the second question. The next point I want to bring out or question that I want to ask is that the government has admitted that something needs to be done. There are concerns by Singaporeans regarding jobs and livelihood. So, but this thing has been going on and on. Has sufficient measures been taken to address all this? One of the things I want to ask is, has the government actually tried to find out what is the total number of displaced Singaporeans? I would think that you can't deny that there are Singaporeans who are displaced. Your narrative is that, oh, they are all because they don't have the skills. Let's not push the blame to the universities and the polytechnics so easily. It has been 20 years since we started the foreign talent policy. Within 20 years, we still haven't got our act together in training our people. That is the third question. What is the total number of Singaporeans that are displaced over the last 10 years? They would like to have the job taken up by a foreigner, but he was not able to. He lost the job. He lost his current job. And when he get into another job, he got lower pay. And there are a significant number of Singaporeans who are underemployed. You look at the growth of the Grab drivers, the growth of the our traineeship program, and the many of our independent workers. Okay, are they voluntarily opting for the independent lifestyle, or are they facing a difficulty in getting into a permanent job? Has the Manpower Ministry done a study on those things? Have you got the statistics? That's a third question. The fourth question is, of course, we are particularly concerned about the finance and the IT sectors. Minister Tan See Leng has given some numbers. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to digest those numbers. So we will maybe discuss that in our debate in the future. But the fourth question I want to ask is really, how many foreigner PMET, how many foreigners are there in our IT and our finance sectors versus the number of Singaporeans and PRs? That's the fourth question. I think Minister might have given some figures just now. Yeah. The fifth question is, you say that we are not competitive. Singaporeans are not competitive. But
Mr. Leong, I would urge you to stick to the facts. I think we've all been participating in this debate and listening intently, so I do suggest that you keep to what has been said. A lot of questions have been answered as well. So the idea of the debate is to debate the issues that have been raised. So please do that.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm raising questions. So am I, can you be more specific?
You are free to raise questions. Some of these points have been covered. So we'll be happy to take the time to debate whatever that's meaningful, but please make it meaningful.
I don't understand what you mean by meaningful, because I'm going through those points. Okay, never mind. I'll try. Okay, the fifth question is, The MOM has been, we have this foreign talent policy for 20 years. But if you look at the way MOM has administered and regulate the flow of foreign PMETs into Singapore, you find that the policies, of course, over time, there's a bit of tightening at a time. But generally, it seems to be too little and too late. For example, the foreign talent policy has started in the late 90s or around the year 2000. But the fair consideration framework was only introduced in 2014. And then only in 2016, I was told, you have started the Fair Consideration Framework watch list. You mean that 1.5 decades before that, there were no problems at all? And the threshold salaries that you have, just EP alone, up till 2020 last year, it was still $3,600. At that kind of threshold salary plus no CPF, do you think we are attracting the right foreign talent into Singapore? That is my fifth question. My sixth question is, I totally agree with Minister Tan See Leng about what we are driving at is not abolishing things. It's not totally eradicating things. We are also talking about a rebalancing. But the rebalancing cannot come as a result of a natural attrition from COVID. There must be a policy recognition that whether our past foreign policy, our foreign talent policy, was on the right track or not. If we review the policy and we think that, oh, there are certain things that we need to change, then make it a policy point. Don't allow natural attrition to come by and say, oh, tens of thousands have left Singapore already. That is not the way we conduct policy. So it's about rebalancing. But when we talk about rebalancing, Minister Tan also said one thing is to ensure that Singaporeans can compete fairly, or there's no unfair competition. And he explained that not having to pay CPF for the employment pass holder is not a disadvantage. Okay, as an employer, I respect you for your experience in the private sector, Minister Tan. As an employer, isn't that a wage concession? So how can we say that Singaporeans are not being treated unfairly in the job market competition? That is my sixth question. My seventh question is, you said, Minister Tan said that there's simply not enough local talent. Again, I will raise the point which I've said just now also. Then what happened to our education system? What happened after 20 years? You're still telling Singaporeans that we're not enough talent. Of course, we are not saying that we can substitute the foreign PMETs completely. But at least there can be some rebalancing. And we get back to my question just now, and if you admit that there's some displacement of Singaporeans, then that rebalancing means we must slowly allow Singaporeans to be given the first opportunity to take up the jobs first. That is my last question. is you talk about diversity, but here again, isn't it something that the MOM should have done long ago about diversity in the workforce when we introduced our foreign talent policy? We also know, because we have worked in international environment before, the group dynamics at the workplace can change very fast with changes in the nationality composition in the company. So especially when the MOM is monitoring and regulating the granting of the work passes, you mean you have not, at the beginning, taken that as an important consideration? And today, then you have to say that, oh, on my watch list, I have this number of companies that have a very large concentration of PMETs from a single nationality. So we really want to understand how MOM actually administer this whole foreign PMET policy. Okay. Afterwards, maybe I will add a few more points, or I will ask a few more questions about the approval process, some of the experiences I had in the private sector with regards to how MOM has approved work passes. But my questions are these questions for now. Thank you.
It's a long list of questions which I'm not sure help us bring the discussion forward. Let me take questions 3 to 8 and then 1 to 3. Yeah, 3 to 8 is really under Ministry of Manpower, but I think let's not prolong this because as Speaker have noticed, many of the questions are actually in our speeches, but if you don't accept what we say, there's very little room for us to further explain. Long and short is we have been extremely successful, and I have explained this in my ministerial statement, in growing the Singapore economy, creating this multitude of jobs. I gave examples of our port, airport, financial services, ICT, manufacturing, you name it, we are hubs of all hubs. And all this would not have been possible if we have not ride on the wave of globalization, welcome foreign talent, and give our own people very good training, education to rise up and take the positions. I mentioned that our only problem is there's not enough of us. Investors come here, they want to hire Singaporeans. They know our education system is solid. And we have such a wonderful reputation around the world, something that as Singaporeans we should be proud of. A bit stressful, this education system a bit stressful still, but we should be very proud of that. But the problem is there's still not enough of us. There are some questions you say we have given figures, so I don't think I answered those. You mentioned a whole series of procedural policy. How come the fair consideration framework come in so late? Why is the bar for entry salary raised only later? We've been reviewing policies. MOM, successive manpower ministers have been reviewing policies all the while. Policies are never static. It worked for a period of time. Then when China, India grow, you got a different influx of workers. You need to adjust your position. Then you review, and this process will continue, and we will continue to debate in this House on the pros and cons. You can't say because we implement something new now to respond to the situation, therefore we have failed. Why didn't you do it 5 years ago? It doesn't work like that. That's not policy making. That's not how this House works. Then every bill that's tabled in this House is, you have failed, you should have tabled this bill 5 years ago. It doesn't make sense. But more importantly is to go back to the first 3 questions that you posed to me, but actually I posed to you first. Because Ms. Hazel Phua actually at one point, if I heard correctly, she said we are not against FTA, we support FTA. I thought we start to have some common ground. And then when she asked me about Chapter 9. She's not a trade negotiator, so I think those are fair questions. I have been trade negotiator for many years. I explained how the chapter ought to be read, and I hope that she asked that, I hope, is because you might have read the chapter wrongly, to think that Singapore shall allow 127 or professionals from 127 categories to enter, no question asked. After my explanation, I was hoping that she come to the conclusion that they might have interpreted the chapter wrongly. But I think after hearing Mr. Leong Man Wai, I think my assumptions are all wrong. So let me change my question. I had two questions first, and was hoping to hear yes. And I think first, after hearing Mr. Leong, although he said he's not against FTA, but then he went on to say that you use freedom movement of natural person as a bargaining chip and sell away our rights for immigration, which I've explained is untrue. So after all the explanation, you still come to that conclusion, then I say this. Number one, PSP, you are against globalization, you are against FTA, even though I've gone to great length to explain that this is the bedrock of Singapore's economic survival. Number two, you are really not taking back the falsehoods and the allegations. After I quoted everything, I don't think you are taking it back. You do feel that the FTA and CECA, despite our explanation, let in Indian professionals freely into Singapore. I think those are your position. Please prove me wrong, but after hearing you, I'm afraid these are your position.
Mr. Tan See Leng.
Mr. Speaker, I must admit that notwithstanding the fact that this is my first ministerial statement, I find it, I actually struggle, to follow Mr. Leong's line of reasoning. I guess because of the fact that quite a number of the issues, I think he's looking at it from, first and foremost, a hindsight kind of a perspective itself, where why is it that you didn't do this, why is it that we didn't do that? I think if you look at the entire sort of time, and I'm going to take a bit of time on this thing itself to try and gather my thoughts to connect his thoughts together, which, like I said, I'm struggling. So please be patient with me. I think what is important is that if we look at the evolution of our industry, how we started in the 70s, in the very early part of my speech, at the time we were about 20 billion GDP. I think we're at 454 billion now. We started with a very conscious effort in the 70s to go and build heavy industry. So we developed Jurong Island. There was all these heavy industries that we put up. I think our pioneer founding generation leaders under Mr. Lee, Dr. Goh and all that, I think at the time when we first started, we were very, very heavy in all these heavy industries. We went on then into manufacturing. In the 80s, we went into electronics. We did disk drives, wafer fab, and then eventually we pivoted into I think in the early part of 2000, we went into services, we went into biopharma, life sciences, and so on and so forth. And now we're into tech, we're into infocom, we're in finance. Now, at every 10 to 15 years, we've seen fairly dramatic transformation. I think it's inconceivable that you would expect that policies that you would enact do not get refined, do not get tweaked, and do not get adjusted over time. So I guess to his point about the fact that why is it that we didn't do this and so on, I think in the last 15, 20 years, and he has sort of pointed the fact that I've been from the private sector, perhaps I've not been in the government long enough. If anything at all for the last 20 years, change was a constant. Change is a constant and change will be a constant. We will continually face disruption, we will face transformation. So, to his other point about why is it that we're not able to have all this workforce ready in spite of all of our education upgrades and so on, I think if we all had a crystal ball 20, 30 years ago, and we could gaze so, sort of clearly into the future itself, perhaps even for himself. I mean, as a CEO of a private equity firm, I think all the necessary investments made would have been perfect and spot on. But I guess perhaps I think hindsight, like what they always say, is perfect. Now, to the other point about private sector, how we package the CPF into it, indeed, I can share with you, perhaps my experience is very limited. I've just been in healthcare all my life. But the fact is that, and I do admit that I lobbied at that time, 5-6 years ago, for an increase in the number of S passes because of the fact that I needed to deliver a certain level of nursing care. I just couldn't hire enough of the nurses to come in and help me. And while we don't pay CPF, the cost of actually bringing them in is higher because we have to package in housing allowance, and really because of the fact that they know the employer part of it is imputed into our costs. And I can tell you with conviction, because I've done it for many, many years in my life, that package that we actually pay out is higher than what we do pay locally. The only difference, of course, is the overtime charges and so on. But I think that's another sort of a thing altogether. To your point about the education system part, I just want to share one bit. In the early 2000s, our universities, our institution of higher learnings, the number of IT graduates that they produce at that particular point in time, today, we are actually training up 4 times more what we used to be training from before. The entry levels in terms of the grades, the credits and so on, that the students require to make it to get into the universities itself is also significantly higher. So I guess the point of this thing is that everything we could, every single initiative, every single policy, we can always do better. And that's something that I've acknowledged. But the point is this: we are not that far worse off. Today, if you look at the absolute numbers, 3/4 of our population, of our PMEs, are in good jobs. 1/4 of them are filled by foreign work pass holders. Our glass is not even half full. Our glass is 3/4 full. And we're looking at it from that perspective. Are you saying that we should even adjust that? Of course, we should try to bring it up to the fact that it would be 90% or 100% full. But let's also be mindful of the sentiment, the worries, and also the hard work of the other 3/4 in that glass that's 3/4 full. I think, thank you very much. I look forward to a robust debate with Mr. Leong, with Ms. Phua. I think when they can put up the questions where I don't struggle so hard to follow, I think that would be very welcoming. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Speaker, you agree with me. We really need to move on. And to move on, can I go back to my 2 questions for the 2 honourable members from the PSP? One, that do they not agree FTA, including CECA, are fundamental to Singapore's economic survival? Yes or no? 2, CECA does not allow a free flow of Indian PMEs into Singapore. And this is a falsehood and a gross misunderstanding of the agreement. If they agree, I think we can have a meaningful debate when they table the motion.
Mr. Leong.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Minister, for the two questions. As I said, the answers to the two questions actually requires a bit more debate and study. But first, I want to say that PSP and Hazel and I, we are for FTAs. And having heard that the jobs and livelihood of people are not being used as a bargaining chip, we are very reassured that our interests, the Singaporean interests, are being taken care of. However, whether CECA has contributed to the overall influx of nationals from the country, I think we need to study a bit more, because we have to go back and look at the numbers provided by the two ministers to see what is the share of the Indian PMETs in our overall PMET workforce, and to take into consideration what Minister Tan See Leng has said about we really need them. Then we would like to know whether there are skills transfer programs, whether really our education system is really catching up fast enough before we can make, and also the various practices in the market before we can make a final conclusion that CECA is really neutral to beneficial for Singapore. Thank you.
Minister Ong.
Thank you for that, Mr. Leong. So I will just summarize that, yes, the PSP now agrees that FTAs are fundamental to Singapore's economic survival, and that includes CECA. So at least that is a common ground that we have established. I think that's useful, and thank you, Mr. Leong, for that. And second, the PSP now agrees movement of natural person, Chapter 9, is not used as a chip, and we're not giving away our rights for immigration, and there is no free flow of Indian professionals into Singapore. If I hear him right, I think he's confirming that. He is not sure about the overall balance of the free trade agreement. I think we'll leave it there for our debate later on. But I think these two, I would say, form quite good common ground. But it will also mean
Mr. Leong, I will call you when it's time to call you. Let
and
the
it will also
finish.
mean, naturally, that must mean the PSP will take back their allegations that CECA has led to an unfettered flow of Indian professionals into Singapore. Thank you.
Mr. Leong.
Speaker, to what the Minister have said just now, I think there's a bit of a misinterpretation. What I've said is that we fully support FTAs. We know that that's important for Singapore. And we appreciate the point that we are not using the movement of people as a bargaining chip in the negotiation of the FTAs. But as to whether CECA has contributed to the influx of some of the PMETs in Singapore in relation to our overall foreign talent policy, we have to explore that. And we don't agree that CECA is net beneficial to Singapore at this stage.
Minister Ong.
I think Mr. Leong is waffling. Yes, no, it's quite hard to catch. I take it that you are not withdrawing your allegation, and so be it. And I think that will be, well, at least we got you to say FTA and CECA is fundamental to our survival. But if you continue to allege, notwithstanding all our explanation, I think there is no choice. We have to leave it as such. It is regrettable because generations of FTA negotiators worked very hard to make sure our interests are all protected. And this is not a backdoor. This is not an avenue for any professionals from any country to enter Singapore with a free hand and unfettered. But I take it that this is PSP's position, notwithstanding hearing all our explanation. It is most regrettable, but we will have to accept how they feel.
Ms. Janet Ang.
Mr. Speaker, I guess on this topic,
You may remove the mask, if you wish.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Always forget it. Sorry. Yeah, I would like to declare that I'm a council member of the Singapore Business Federation. I thank, on behalf of the business community, both the minister's ministerial statement and, of course, contrary to closing the doors, the businesses are begging, please open the doors, we need workers, otherwise who's going to do the work? But nonetheless, if I may, I am a product of Singapore's MNC strategy, and during the budget debate and COS, I have shared my views regards embracing diversity of talents from all over the world so that we can be uniquely competitive. So, for today, I will not go there. I will talk a little more about FTAs, in support of FTAs, and a lot have been said, but perhaps, if you all can bear with me a while, from the business community, why is this important? Now, as a small and open economy without natural resources, we are of course highly dependent on international trade and highly integrated, well-functioning global value chains. And international trade not only provides us with the products that we import and consume, but also connects us to the global market that supports our businesses and sustains our economy, creating the good jobs that Singaporeans have enjoyed in the past and aspire to for the future. So with Singapore's international trade more than 3 times its gross GDP, our livelihoods and prosperity depend heavily on international trade. And for Singapore businesses, free and open trade premised on the foundation of a rules-based multilateral trading system is crucial to ensuring a conducive, stable, and predictable environment. This is particularly important for us considering that we are just a little red dot. Hence the importance of free trade agreements. So as Minister Ong has earlier said, we have over 26 FTAs, and our network of free trade agreements covers about 85% of global GDP, enhancing the value proposition of countries and economies that sit at the nodes of these networks, and Singapore is one of them. So the FTAs yield tangible value to our companies. In 2018 alone, I understand that our companies enjoyed more than 1.1 billion in tariff savings. These FTAs accord our businesses preferential market access into the markets of our major trading partners, lowering entry barriers for the export of goods and services, as well as protecting their investments in other countries. So the strong FTA network can be a tool for our businesses, not only in reducing their costs and time to market, but also in ensuring a predictable trading environment. Despite the pandemic, Singapore's total services trade exports in 2020 amounted to $259 billion, with China, US, EU, and Malaysia as our top trading partners. I would dare say that because our Singapore businesses remain very plugged into our FTA network, we have been able to ride the storm of COVID-19 a little better than if we were disconnected. Now, we should know firsthand what it's like to be disconnected, considering the impact we experience in aviation and tourism because of border closures. Trade, along with foreign direct investments into Singapore, will drive our economic recovery and the resumption of business activities post-COVID-19, even as we restlessly reinvent our industries, innovate ideas, products, services, and business models to emerge stronger post-pandemic. Now, through this crisis, the businesses have realized the urgent need to build resilience in their business models and supply chains, partly by exploring new markets and supply sources. And many have shifted away from lean supply chain models to adopt agile supply chain strategies. And the FTAs are even more relevant than ever before for our businesses. The COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically accelerated digital transformation to the top of the board's agenda in every company. And Singapore's digital economy agreements, DEAs, with Chile, New Zealand, Australia, and potentially the UK, look to provide frameworks for regulatory cooperation in support of trade and business in the digital economy and address issues arising from these emerging technologies. And as we have heard from Minister of Trade and Industry yesterday, MTI and government agencies have been hard at work looking into various new opportunities for us to enter into new trade agreements, including for renewable energy, green economy, etc. And, so on that count, frankly speaking, on behalf of the business community, I'd like to acknowledge all the efforts by MTI, MOF and all the government agencies for their efforts in helping our businesses to be competitive. Now, it's all about teamwork. So in order to help our companies familiarize themselves with Singapore FTAs and improve their global competitiveness, the business community, supported by Singapore Business Federation, holds regular workshops as well as seminars and provides complimentary advisory services to assist the Singapore companies on FTA-related inquiries. And businesses can utilize these available resources and leverage SBF to provide feedback on how existing and future FTAs can better serve their needs, and we continually do so. So to conclude, Singapore businesses, in our opinion, cannot afford to take a wait-and-see approach. We will need to navigate the pressing issues that adversely impact supply chains and business processes. Singapore businesses need to be born international. Across industries, developing the DNA to tap into overseas markets and to trade with multilateral partners is critical for businesses to be successful, given Singapore's limited domestic market. So FTAs offer a key tool for businesses to expand into new markets, enhancing accessibility of different markets by allowing businesses to export more freely and easing some of the regulations. Now, but Singapore and Singaporeans must humbly recognize that we are vulnerable. Past success does not guarantee future success. We need to exercise humility and restlessly reinvent ourselves. Some areas of concern highlighted in the recent World Competitiveness Report, in my opinion, is rather worrisome. These include potential relocation of businesses being a threat to the Singapore economy, perception of Singapore's changing attitude towards globalization, which Minister Ong has also highlighted earlier, the availability of skilled labor, qualified engineers and competent senior managers in Singapore, regardless of nationality. So the availability of skilled labor and competent senior managers is a concern, and as well as our immigration laws preventing hiring of foreign labor. Now, such perceptions could erode Singapore's attractiveness as a business capital. And our businesses are concerned, and I'm sure the government is equally concerned. And I believe Singaporeans, we should be concerned as well. Singapore's miracle has been attributed to our leaders deciding on a few right strategies, generation upon generation, and then together with the support and passion of all Singapore businesses and workforce, executing those strategies brilliantly with humility, but with pride and solidarity as Singaporeans. We believed in each other. We have done it before. We can do it again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ni Biam Heng.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you. Well, I wasn't intending to speak, but I just want to, since Minister Ong Ye Kung mentioned that I was the chief negotiator for CECA, I thought I must put on record the question that Mr. Leong Man Wai asked. Let me first say that I'm terribly troubled by the way that the PSP has taken this, and I want to put on record clearly that the movement of natural persons is a very important chapter, but it was not used as a bargaining chip to trade for what else we got. It was not. So let me give you a very brief history of FTAs, because I was in the Ministry of Trade Industry at that time, first as a Deputy Secretary and then as a Permanent Secretary. In 2000, the Doha round of WTO negotiation was launched. And Minister George Yeo then and I were at Doha. We saw the entry of China into the WTO. But soon after the launch, our assessment and Minister George Yeo's assessment then was that it looks like Doha round will not go very far. And indeed, he was proven correct. And he said, what does Singapore need to do to ensure our continued survival? So Minister Ong Ye Kung earlier mentioned about the importance of free trade to Singapore. Trade is more than 3 times our GDP, and will continue to be so. So he decided that we should pursue free trade agreement, and our very first free trade agreement was with New Zealand, 2 small little economies. And I must say that I can tell you that people were laughing, that what could 2 small little economies do to advance the cause of free trade? Well, we persisted, and we got the first agreement done, and thereafter we went on to do a number of other agreements. And when I was Permanent Secretary, I was in the trenches negotiating many agreements with our ASEAN counterparts. And that's how we had the ASEAN Economic Free Trade Agreement that was enhanced, the ASEAN Economic Community, and thereafter, it was not just ASEAN. There were 2 things that we did. One was free trade agreement between Singapore and other countries, far bigger economies, Japan, Australia, US, and then more recently, the European Union. Now, you asked quite correctly, what is Singapore's bargaining chip? The honest answer is very little. We only have tariffs on 3 items: beer, stout, samsu. Yeah. And what is that as a bargaining chip? But I think a very important quality for our public policy is that we must be creative and we must learn to meet the needs of other countries, to see what may be in the agreement that is of benefit to them. So how do we manage to negotiate trade agreements with big economies that have a lot of concerns? For example, Japan was very concerned about agriculture. And in the case of India, there was an even wider range of concern. So let me tell Mr. Leong and your team that I spent 3 years of my life negotiating this agreement. Because although I was a permanent secretary, and permanent secretary usually just supervise, they don't get into the trenches, the Indian side decided that it was an important agreement, they would have a perm-sec. And Minister George will say, well, you have no choice. So I ended up being the chief negotiator for CECA. And I can tell you the amount of homework I had to do to look at how we can come to an agreement. I went to different parts of India because there was objection from every part of India, from business group to states. And I can share with you long stories about some of those most intriguing demands, which I managed to explain why we can't do that. So the movement of natural person was a chapter which, indeed, the Indian negotiators were very keen because they said, what do we get? Well, I said no, because this is of great importance to Singapore. You have a population that is over 1 billion. Singapore has a population of, at that time, probably about 3 odd million. And I said we'll be easily swamped. So we must have very strict agreements on this. And that was, in fact, among the last chapter. There were 2 chapters that were the most difficult to conclude, for which I never let go, and we got what we needed. So I think Mr. Leong must not think that you said, I hope that the government has the people's interest at heart. Of course, why do we negotiate free trade agreements and why do we do this public service if it's not with the interest of our people at heart? And why do I spend 3 years of my life doing the agreement? So please be reasonable and don't mislead Singaporeans. Now, I want to raise two other issues which are very important. First, you said that why is it that we don't have talent, and what happened to our university? Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean was Education Minister, so was I, and all our education ministers are sitting here. I must say that I'm extremely proud of what our schools and our IHLs have done over the years to groom Singaporeans. The World Bank has ranked Singapore the best in the world in educating our people. So please do not go around thinking that, we have not put in enough effort. And in fact, we have increased cohort participation rates from 20% of cohort to now 40%. Government funded. We now have 6 universities. We have polytechnics and ITEs, which provide the most valuable practice-oriented learning. We have enhanced it with Skills Future. We have now work and learn program and a whole range of programs. So I think, Mr. Leong, you will better serve Singaporeans if you help Singaporeans understand how changes are taking place so quickly, and you must help to encourage people to upgrade and learn new skills. And work to support our unions in forming company training committees and job security council and the like, in order to raise the ability of Singaporeans to compete. So I think to say that our education system has not done a good job or the government has not put enough, I would seriously ask you to rethink that and come back and debate us on that. Let me also end by mentioning two very important points which our two MPs have just raised. Professor Hun Hien Teck, who made an excellent point that the future of competition will be a future of competition of innovation and technology. And it is very important for us to bring in some of the best people to work with Singaporeans, grow Singaporeans to be able to excel in that new realm. It's going to be a different world. So please do not get stuck in the old world and think that, we can excel all on our own. Let us have an open attitude to work with countries around the world who are willing to cooperate and work with us. I just last week had a very good session with the Minister of Higher Education, Research and Innovation of France. And we talked about what France and Singapore can do together in our research agenda, in our innovation agenda. And France is not a small country, and they had a long history of science and innovation. So that's a very important point that Professor Hun Hien Teck had made. And the other important point, Ms. Janet Ang, who talked about the digital opportunities and the new market. No sector in our economy is going to be immune from competition. Economists used to have this concept of tradable and non-tradable sector. Non-tradable sectors are naturally protected because they are in your neighborhood. Your neighborhood shops, who is going to compete with you? Today, with e-commerce, our neighborhood shops are under stress. And that is why we have a program as part of our industry transformation to help our neighborhood shops upgrade. That is why IMDA has put in so much effort on this SME Go Digital and so on. So I think it is very important for the right policy in Singapore, A, to stay open, B, to learn how to cope with changes, which will be accelerating, and C, make the best use of science, technology, and innovation to allow us to move forward, and fourthly, maintain unity so that businesses, unions, workers, and the government work closely together to make the very significant changes that you need to make. Thank you.
Mr. Pridam Singh. Mr. Pridam Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just have two supplementary questions, one for Minister Ong and one for Minister Dr. Tan. For Minister Ong, in 2016, my parliamentary colleague, Workers' Party MP Leong asked the then Minister of Manpower and this was arising out of feedback from the ground about CECA issues of a lot of Indian nationals working on the ground. And the question Mr. Leong asked was about the number of ICTs that were working in Singapore through CECA. And at that point, the reply that came was the ministry does not disclose data on foreign manpower with breakdown by nationality, including data on ICTs. In February this year, Mr. Leong Man Wai of the PSP asked a question about the number of ICTs working in Singapore. This time, the government disclosed overall ICT numbers over employment pass holders. And the number was, I think, something like 5% of EP holders. Today, we have more information that last year at least 500 of these ICTs originated from India. The point I want to make to the Minister and to the government at large is there is opportunity to quell or at least to nip some of these issues in the bud when they start moving into the realm of xenophobia, nativism, and one important outlet for that is information. And in August 2020, a Straits Times reporter mentioned that, and I quote, ICTs were a key bone of contention with respect to CECA. And if this information had been made known earlier, it does occur to me whether a lot of the misunderstanding, the reaction we see on CECA could have been addressed and actually nipped in the bud. And so I hope the government understands that with more information, actually, we can hold the line better in terms of some of these discussions moving into a realm of xenophobia and so forth. My question to Minister Tan See Leng pertains to TAFEP and the strengthening of the enforcement arm of TAFEP. We had an exchange in the opening of Parliament about this, and I'd just like to confirm with Dr. Tan whether raising the enforcement arm of TAFEP is on the cards, and what discussions have taken place since August last year insofar as how TAFEP will be beefed up. The WP has a position about anti-discrimination legislation. Is that something that MOM will be prepared to look into? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Pritam, for his question. We are reviewing our existing frameworks. And the suggestion that you've talked about, the position that you have alluded to in terms of legislation and all that, it's not something that has just come out from the Workers' Party. If you go back in terms of the past proceedings and so on, I believe that quite a number of the Labour MPs, including Mr. Patrick Tay, I believe that a non-Labour MP, I think even Mr. Leong had also raised it at the same time or over different times. One of the things that the assurance I want to give to the House, to everyone who has raised it and who's concerned about this, is to allow myself, together with the team, together with the tripartite partners, to go deep, look at all the different implications, look at also the various options that we have to see how we can strengthen it. And as I've alluded to in my speech, Mr. Singh, I think you appreciate the fact that given where we are today, it's a very tight rope that we're navigating. On the one hand, we want to continue to strengthen, to tighten. On the other hand, businesses, have this competing interest of asking us to be a bit more lax. One of the reassurance that I want to, and our ministry wants to reassure members of the House here, is our consistent focus on, and we have never divided our attention away or diverted our attention from developing the Singaporean core. We are fully cognizant of the angst, the fears, the worries about making sure that there's fair, there's equal opportunity in terms of even the development to capability transfers, capability development, fair hiring, promotion, and so on and so forth. All those things we will be reviewing in order for us to strengthen that framework. So I don't want to sort of go down a prescribed route today because we are exploring the entire universe. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Minister Ong Ye Kung, if we can wrap up the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will answer the Leader of the Opposition's question and then seek to conclude this debate. I take to heart what the Leader of Opposition said, that with information we can quell such falsehoods much earlier. We work in the bureaucracy, some data is classified, secret, confidential, so on. So we are not at liberty to always disclose them. But what you say is true. Some information is better to come out early, and then we can move on. And especially, as you say, when it concerns issues like racism or xenophobia, it's much better to quell it early. And I take comfort that based on what you say, I think you do agree that FTA CECA is fundamental to our survival. And that really, I hope you heard our explanation and is convinced that CECA Chapter 9 does not allow an unfettered inflow of Indian professionals. If you disagree and I misrepresented you, please jump up and correct me. I don't think you will. Yeah. DPM Heng, myself, we are former trade negotiators fighting in the trenches with our fellow teammates, which is why I think we both felt compelled to say something today. Negotiating an FTA requires a lot of dedication and hard work. It takes a toll on the family because you are out of country all the time. Our negotiators, we are up against very formidable partners sometimes. Our job is to advance Singapore's interests while protecting our areas of sensitivities. But we work hard at it, nevertheless, because we know it makes a huge difference to Singapore. Benefit industries and companies, create jobs for our people, secure our place in the world. This is where we are coming from. So I felt sad somewhat that the PSP did not withdraw their allegations. Yeah. When we explain how a FTA works and how Chapter 9 works, it is a statement of fact. This is how it works. It's not a matter of your opinion or your perspective. So the logical thing for PSP to do, I felt, is to withdraw the allegations. Then we can discuss employment policies, how we can better protect, educate, train our workers, and these are very legitimate questions. But PSP did not do the logical thing. I couldn't hear a definitive position from Mr. Leong or Ms. Hazel Phua, waffle a bit. And then I think what I heard was they cannot conclude either way now whether CECA is better or worse for our workers. But if you cannot conclude either way, then the honorable thing is to also withdraw the allegations while you figure out which way you want to lean. But I don't think we saw what was logical nor honorable. A successful FTA strategy is not just about negotiating skills. It's important, but fundamentally it requires us to be broad-minded and able to cast our sights far and wide to the whole world and work with like-minded partners out there. And that is why COVID-19 is such an existential crisis for us. It has forced us to close our borders. But I'm confident that once we get the great majority of population vaccinated, control the pandemic, we can reopen the borders progressively again. But what I'm worried about, that even when our borders are reopened, What about our hearts and our minds? Will they be reopened? If because of COVID or during the COVID pandemic, anti-foreigner sentiments, xenophobia, creeps into our collective psyche, and even if our borders are open, hearts and minds are not and will remain closed, then we will not recover from COVID-19. Then we will truly have a long COVID. Of all times, this is the worst time, in the middle of a crippling pandemic, to talk about turning inwards, to reject FTAs, reject globalization. I say we should emerge from COVID-19 announcing to the world that Singapore continues to be that shining jewel in Southeast Asia, the largest transshipment port in the world, the special Changi experience, a financial services hub, an IT capital, a hub for manufacturing, hospitality, mines, so on. Here the world converges. You can experience the richness of many cultures and also the uniquely Singapore character. Singaporeans will benefit immensely from this because of the opportunities it brings and how the international linkages and relationships cement our position in the world. And most importantly, we will be more united, and we must be more united than ever. And every one of us know that because we all did our part, whether it's getting vaccinated, undergoing regular testing, observe safe management measures, helping others in need, taking care of patients, all of us did our part. We stayed united, and the unity is what helped us conquer and overcome this pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Pursuant to Standing Order number 44-2, the motion to consider 2 ministerial statements on free trade agreements and foreign manpower lapses at the conclusion of debate. Order, I propose to take a break now, suspend the sitting, and we'll take the chair at 4:50 p.m. Order, order.